Hello and welcome to Insight, a show where we have courageous conversations about social justice and the issues affecting the citizens of the region of Peel and beyond. I'm one of your hosts, David Barnwell, and I'd like to give you a couple examples that will highlight our topic for this episode. No, don't adjust your TV screens by any means. This is all part of the act. I'd like to give you instructions on how to go from the reception desk to the Insight studio. You need to go down this way and around that corner over there. Yep, and then when you approach the gray door that has the sign marked Insight Studio, it's the double doors just after that. I don't know if you could see my hand gestures, but I'm sure it would be very difficult to understand the directions I just gave you. Now I'll give you another example. Could you follow where I was telling you to go? And as a third example, what if just now I've caught your attention and you start feeling a little uneasy? You didn't catch what I said before. Maybe you have a difficult time paying attention or grasping information if it's delivered too quickly. I'm highlighting various forms of disabilities, and that is the topic for this evening's episode of Insight. That is living with disabilities. We're joined by our Insight host, Ranjit, and our very special guest host, Molly Burke, as well as three guests who will be sharing their authentic story, Jamila, Shana, and Alessandro. Over to you, Ranjit.
Thank you, and welcome to Insight. Fantastic show. I'm so excited to have you here with me, Molly, hosting, and especially with being blind. Honestly, it's a pleasure to meet you. And to know the inspirational work that you do. What is it that, for me, what is it that really inspires you to turn everything that's negative in your life in terms of the disability, in terms of having to have a guide dog with you all of the time, and changing it into something that's inspirational?
Well, you know, I went blind when I was 14, and I went through a long period of depression and anger and sadness and asking why me, and praying for a different life. And eventually I realized that that's no way to live. And I had to feel those things, I had to grieve my loss, but then I had to learn to rise above it and live despite it. And so now I choose to find the positives. Yes, the negatives are obvious. They're there. I can't drive a car and things like that, but there's also so many positives. And I can't change my situation. So I have to accept it and learn to live with it.
And that for me is very inspirational, is to know that there are people that live with disabilities and can rise to a place that inspires people. And I see that you're in schools, you're a motivational speaker, and people don't even notice that you're blind and are in awe of what you've been able to achieve.
You know, it's really funny because I constantly get asked, oh, are you training that dog, and questions like that. And when I tell people, no, I'm blind, he's my guide dog, I always hear, but you don't look blind. Mm-hmm. And I think there's been so many stereotypes created by mainstream media about what disability acts like and looks like and should be. But the fact of the matter is, very few of us are really like that. Mm-hmm. And that's why shows like this and conversations like this are so important, because we need to change the general public's perception of disability. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And Jamila, you have a TV show that deals with disabilities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So Voice for All is the only show on Rogers TV that solely promotes disability awareness and education within the Peel region. We're in our 5th season, and it's been a very proud project to take on, just because there's so many stories out there that deserve to be heard, community groups that need to be represented, and that's why the show's called A Voice for All. It's for people with disabilities, educators, frontline staff, their parents, and just educating the whole region on something that we need to pay more attention to.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've learned a lot since doing the show as well.
Well, I've been in the field for 17 years. The show came about afterwards, but it's definitely expanded my thinking and just my whole attitude on people's negative attitude towards people with disabilities, and how I could help kind of change that thinking.
And I think that that's the most critical piece, is when we can do some self-reflection
Yes.
in terms of how we deal with people and how we can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what we need to do and how we need to find out what we need to do. And quite frankly, until you're interacting with people with disabilities, you really don't get it. You know, it's really, really difficult. I know a friend of ours had an accident and was in a wheelchair. And I think for the first time ever, I realized access to buildings was an issue.
When
Right?
you don't need to know about the issue, you don't know about it. My mom and
Right.
I were just discussing how I often, when I'm walking around, hear people go, "Oh, it's one of those blind dogs," or just things like that, and they just don't even know what to call it. A guide dog.
Guide dog.
Because there's no reason they ever needed to be educated on it, so
Right.
they just end up by default staying ignorant.
And I think that's the piece. And it's really difficult, though, to be respectful of issues that you haven't been exposed to. So it's not until you have the privilege of meeting people like yourselves that you get that opportunity to do that, right? And Alexandro really inspired me. Alexandro, yes, you did. You really inspired me when Shauna, your mom, was helping doing a fundraiser. So can you tell us a little bit about that, Shauna? And then maybe you can get in there too and help Mom explain. Can you do that for me, Alexandro? Yes, you can. So Shauna, do you want to start?
Sure. Speaking of accessibility, we face that day to day. Alessandro has a physical disability. He's being his silly
It's
little
okay, he's
7-year-old
having fun.
self.
Yeah, he's having fun.
But he's Alessandro's 7 years old. He has cerebral palsy, so in his case, it affects his motor function.
But I'm getting better.
But he's
It is
trying
getting
very
better.
hard. It's a lifelong disability. He has to learn to live with it, but he's always working towards trying to achieve his best in terms of his mobility and function. And yeah, we're always looking for things that are new, new therapies, new surgeries that are out there that would help. You know, in our case, there was, and I think we face a lot of challenges where, like how you said, Molly, that people, when they don't need to know, they don't. But even professionals who deal with people with disabilities sometimes don't necessarily look outside the box, and they're so used to thinking in a certain way that they don't want to explore other avenues, so they kind of resign themselves to a predetermined outcome, and they expect you to resign yourself to that outcome as well. And I think Alessandro is always inspiring me, and hopefully we inspire other people to challenge those predetermined outcomes.
And I know that you've pushed Alexandro to often his limits, you know, where you know that he can reach just that next goal. And sometimes finances have been a big issue, right? And we've had to go out, or you've gone out and done fundraisers. And we have to, as parents, we know that we want to push our kids. And even if there are challenges, Alexandro, you do a lot of things, don't you, in the community? And I know that...
So much. Sometimes I do it.
Yes, you do.
Not so much.
Not so much, but you do. And sometimes you don't realize, Alexandro, sometimes you don't realize how inspirational you are, because you have inspired lots of young people, right, with the great work that you do.
Yeah, so we're actually very lucky. We've had our communities gather around us and help us do fundraisers, because I'm sure all of you know that when you have a disability, everyone thinks that, especially in the case of a child, that all their therapies and requirements are covered by our healthcare system, and they're absolutely not.
I think that's one of the things that always shocks people.
Yeah, they
how
don't
much is not
realize
covered.
exactly. And when you're looking at physiotherapy at $135 an hour, the bill adds up really quickly. Equipment, everything. So even things like help in the school board and during school. So we're always fighting for our rights, and I hope Alessandro learns that we never give up, right?
So, Alexandra, what's really hard for you? When you're in class, when you're in school, what is really, really difficult for you?
Nothing.
Nothing's difficult?
Nothing.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all.
That's good.
Right.
That's really good.
Something's being done right then.
Exactly. So you've got amazing teachers.
Nothing. Nothing
He's
is
doing
coming.
his Russell Peters, who's his idol.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Have you been to see Russell Peters? Good.
I love him too.
I met him.
Yeah. You did. Good boy. So
Really?
So he does improv and comedy, so he's just a comedian
Really?
all the time.
All
So
the
we're
time.
learning how to, when the appropriate time is to do that, but apparently haven't done that great of a job teaching him that.
No,
So-
it's good that he feels relaxed enough to actually. What was it that Alexandro wanted to talk about? Because you had mentioned that he wants to say his piece.
Yeah, I think, Alessandra, do you remember you wanted to talk about how important it was for kids to fight for their rights and that everybody is equal and everybody deserves the same opportunities and
I
access?
learned that in school. Do you
That's
not
correct.
understand? Told me 200 times.
And I will
Mommy.
tell you 200 times more because it's that important.
And that's really important.
Yes.
And we see that. Do you find that with the people that you're dealing with on an ongoing basis, that the challenges really come from within? You know, that they can get over those obstacles if they feel that they have to and they have no choice.
I teach children. I don't really see their disabilities, if that makes sense. I think being in school, there's obstacles regardless if you have a disability or not.
Right.
So the kids that I teach, I just help them to their best potential, and I find what works for them, and that's what we roll with.
Right.
I don't like to focus on what the hardships may be, because there's hardships regardless, whether it's something visible or something invisible. A child could be going through something at home that, you know, that's causing them to be very stressed at school, and then that changes their whole behavior,
Right.
or they could have physical limitations. There are limitations regardless. So I try to just see past that and see the person.
Yes. And be positive about
Absolutely.
it wherever you
Always,
can,
yeah.
is inspire that. And that's what the show was really intended to focus on what is it that really inspires people with disabilities to push the positive to a place that's, that people look up to, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think when I was dealing with my depression after kind of developing a disability, I really put a lot of those limitations on myself. I was the one telling myself, I can't do that, I'll never, I can't, I won't, I shouldn't. And when I stopped putting those barriers around myself, I actually realized how much potential I had and how amazing my life could truly be.
Right. And it is about that. It's seeing beyond. It's not giving up, right?
Absolutely.
It's just keep going. Because I know for me, I often think, how would I deal with it? And I don't know if I would have the courage to do what you do, you know, in terms of getting out there and being that change agent, you know, is inspiring young people to make that difference. And actually, Alexandro inspired me, Shana, what you were doing in terms of going beyond to give him opportunities to go out to camp that you knew your budget wouldn't allow you to do, but you weren't going to give up. You were going to make it happen. So going that extra step, that extra mile, was really significant because that's what brought the media together.
And I think it's not a choice, right? Like you said, you don't know what you would do, but you would do what you have to do.
Absolutely.
And I think every person and every parent and every individual does what they need to do.
And Alexandro went to a camp, didn't he?
He's been to several.
Camps. Do you enjoy the camps, Alexandro?
Sometimes I be with babies, and that is very annoying because they cry a lot, and I do not like that.
Okay.
So most of his camps are actually therapeutic camps.
Yes.
So
No, the summer camps. And
Yes, so last year we made a conscious decision to try and not just focus on rehab, but to allow him to do something fun.
There's so many great camps.
So with him, I know improv really resonated with him, so he's really been enjoying that. And then he has
I know a great program that would be for him, so we can talk about that after.
Yeah, that sounds great. And we're really lucky, like, you know, a lot of parents, a lot of people reached out to us, and they've been helping us learn.
Improv after school in a different class.
And he does improv after school. He just wanted to make sure he put that in there.
That's great. I think that's great because I think so many times when you have a disability, when you get to that age of recognizing that you might be a little bit different than your peers, it can be really easy to kind of collapse in on yourself and become almost like isolate yourself in ways. And so I think it's great that he's doing that. I did 10 years of acting and improv classes, and that's one of the things that really allowed me to feel comfortable with my own disability. So I think it's great that he loves doing that.
Yeah,
for sure.
What would be your key message, Shauna, to our audience today?
I think, of course, you know, the never give up, but I think also that people need to recognize that a disability is not just the individual's disability. It's, you know, the family's disability. It's the community's disability. It's our country's disability. How we treat our disabled is really the measure of how we are as a society, in Mahatma Gandhi's words. But I think it's so important to see beyond just what is the obvious, and to see that, you know, these kids are going to be the future Stephen Hawking's.
Yeah, for sure. Right? Jamila, what would be your message to our audience today?
I always say that disability issues is not an issue for people with disabilities. It's a human issue.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people and they ask me, you know, why are you in this field? Do you have a relative? I go, no, I don't have a relative. I'm just in it because it's something I care about. And I think that's the main message. I think we put too much responsibility on people, in my opinion, too much responsibility on people with disabilities, that you need to educate people and you need to change their way of thinking, when we as an able-bodied society need to fix ourselves. We don't need to depend on someone to tell me how to be a caring person, how to be an empathetic person. That's just a human issue. If you can focus on one issue, you should be able to focus on all.
I agree. Molly, the last word, please, for this segment.
Well, I mean, I'm so inspired by your family. I think it's fantastic that you're fighting for your son and teaching him to fight for himself. And I completely agree with what you've said about, you know, this disability is a society's issue. It's not just the issue of the person with the disability or the family of the person with the disability. You know, oftentimes I think able-bodied society is more disabled in ways than people with disabilities.
Yes.
I agree with you, and I think it's a learning curve. It's a huge learning curve, and I think when we can teach to that in the classroom, in every age, at every age group, we can start to make a difference. And it's understanding that compassion and caring and loving and being able to bring it to the table on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll be back. We're going to play Matters, and we'll be right back with the next segment on our research for living with disabilities. Thank you.
Being able to play is important for your child's development. Play Matters segments have shared that when children play, they're learning many things, such as how to plan and predict what might happen when they roll, shake, move, or combine toys. Children are also practicing their waiting and turn-taking skills too. Playtime is enjoyable when children's activities are the right size for our children's hands and don't have too many pieces. Sometimes children's toys and activities at home can be difficult to play with when the pieces are small, hard to grab. Sometimes there's just too many places. With some simple changes, adults can adapt toys and make them more enjoyable. Here I have some ways to adapt at home. Let's look at markers, paintbrushes, crayons, and pencil crayons. Here I have a marker. I've got a simple hair curler. I've taken the foam, given it a quick cut. Now I have a handle. This makes the marker bigger. Maybe you've got a paintbrush at home and it's a little small. What could we do? I found a bead. I'm going to put the bead on my paintbrush. I can add a little bit of tape. And now my paintbrush has a lovely handle, makes it bigger. Looking around the house for something else to make bigger? I've got a pencil crayon. This pencil crayon may be small, hard to hold and grasp. How about a few elastics? I've got some on there already, and I'm going to add some more. Elastics can give a little bit of a handle and make something easier to hold or grasp for little hands. I've also got a crayon. Small crayon, might be difficult to hold or grasp. I've got a hair curler. I can put the crayon in the hair curler. Now I've got a little handle as well. It makes the crayon a little sturdier. How about books? I've got a book here. Sometimes when children are looking at books, it's difficult to turn the pages. They turn so many pages at one time. Here I've got something called peel and stick felt circles. I'm going to take a felt circle, I'm going to open up my page, and I'm going to put a felt circle on the top corner. I'm going to get another felt circle and put it on the top corner, and so on and so on. With all the felt circles on a book, here's what it will look like. These are called page fluffers. And when you add page fluffers, it makes the pages easier to turn for little fingers that aren't quite ready for all of the pages. Page fluffers. Do you have puzzles at home? Sometimes children have puzzles and they're not ready for all of the pieces. You don't need to go get new puzzles. I've got a little trick for you. Look around the house for an envelope, just a mailing envelope. I want you to cut the edges, and you can make a puzzle slider. I've made one here. My puzzle goes inside my slider, and now I can do 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces, depending on what the child is ready for. If you have a bigger puzzle, you simply need a bigger envelope. Do you have beading at home? Sometimes strings and little laces are just not what children are ready for. So I've got an idea for you. I've got a wooden spoon from the kitchen, and I've looked around the house for things that are round with a hole. I've got a napkin ring. I've got some bracelets. I've got a shower ring. And oh, I found a toy with a hole. Now I'm doing some early beading on a wooden spoon. These are adaptations that you can make in your house.
Welcome back to Insight. Our show this time is actually on living with disabilities. The show is dedicated to inspiring people that are living with disabilities and what it is that inspires them. Today we have 2 guests that are with us now, Aaron Stiller and Dr. Pradeep. Dr. Pradeep Alexander, thank you for being with us today. So could you share with us a little bit about the people that you deal with that are living with disabilities and what inspires them and how you can inspire them?
Sure. I'm privileged and honored to be a physician in this community, and it's always interesting to see a person, 2 people with the same injury can relate to react in so different ways. I think a lot of it depends on their social supports, what their life was like before. Some people are at the point where they don't have a lot to cope with. They have a lot of other problems, and then an injury happens, and it kind of pushes them over the tipping point. Mm-hmm. There are other people who are lucky to have lots of friends and family can help push them through the times. And I think those are the ones that seem to have a really good attitude and get through the difficult injuries.
Mm-hmm. So the families are a big part of
families, friends, social supports, I think activities outside other interests, learning that to cope with the disability and learning how to look beyond that. I think that's the key part.
Erin, from your experience with dealing with a lot of people that are living with disabilities, can you share what you do and how you would inspire them?
Yeah, I'm kind of a strange role, but primarily a rehabilitation counselor or consultant in that regard. And just to sort of second Dr. Alexander's point. I think family, community, the larger the support network for an individual, I think is what I typically see anyways, the most important component when people have that support network and positive influence, positive speaking in their ear all the time to say that there is a potential, there's more things that can be accomplished. I think you see better outcomes for sure all the time. That's not to say that people without that can't, and certain people do have that innate ability to dig deep and come through it, but I think it's much more rare without that support network. And
it's almost a resilience, isn't it?
100%.
It's almost, what is it that builds resilience? What is it that pushes people to be able to reach up as high as they can to make the change that they need to make in order to be able to get out to the community and be like you are, Molly, an inspiration to young people and adults in terms of living with disabilities. So can you think of one example, for example, that a person that may have come to you and you've seen them grow, and then think of what it was that you saw happening as that person was?
I think there's a number of different facets. One of the biggest that I see now, I mean, I'm still quite young, but even when I first started in this sort of sector, technology, research that has come to light in the last few years has made it, I think, easier and has given people a little bit more hope as well, in the sense that even just our assistive devices, communication capabilities for children with cerebral palsy, there are now programs in place. Dr. Tom Chow down at Bloorview can make a device that even if a child has no hand function or anything like that, they can create a device where they can communicate with their parents through their computer. This kind of technology wasn't available 10, 25 years ago even, for that matter. So I think it's a combination now of acceptance in the community to a certain point. We're still not there yet, but gains have been made in that regard. Technology has increased leaps and bounds where it was from 20 years ago. Chairs are better, home modifications, all these different types of communication factors and mobility aids are a better quality, and I think society is at a different level now where people are more open to this component that we have to be responsible in this way. We make buildings more accessible. Still, again, a long way off, but things are happening where it's more integrative in this society. So I think that is one of the biggest roles as well. Going back to, say, 20 years ago, it was very difficult, very challenging. Even if you had a great support network, there was really no way you could, for that matter.
And I think technology, just to further your point, Aaron, has really changed as well. People have the ability to connect through the internet, through Facebook groups.
Yeah.
I have a lady in particular who had a horrific accident to her leg, and despite multiple attempts at trying to salvage her leg, she ended up having an amputation. And at that time, she didn't have any support. She didn't know anyone who went through the same experience. But she was able to create a website and create a support network. And so frequently when I have a patient going through the same procedure, I actually give them her information to contact. And so it's wonderful. It helps pay it forward.
It's interesting because when you look at the Z generation now, most of the teenagers, they've grown up with technology and they know it inside out. So if it's a disability, if it's an accident that's happened and they've had life, you know, with their limbs and with, you know, the use of all of their body, then all of a sudden when they lose the use of one limb or one aspect of their life, then to still have technology in order to still be able to connect and still have that, it's almost like another limb, you know? It's almost like another avenue that is open to them that hasn't been open in the past. So that's a really interesting, an interesting piece there, and that I hadn't really thought of. Do you
I mean,
find that?
technology has changed my life as a blind person. Absolutely, like you were talking about, being able to connect with other people who have the same disease as me, being able to connect with other service dog users, to talk about the issues, get advice. You know, when I lost my first guide dog to cancer after 7 years, I was devastated. And you know, it's one thing talking to my friends who have lost their family pet, but this is not my pet. This is a lifeline for me. This is my eyes, and it's very different. So being able to connect with people who understood me, who had also lost their service dogs in the past, and it was a huge piece for me. And I think it's so funny because you know, I write a blog, I'm very active on social media, I have a YouTube channel, and all the time I hear people being like, you can't be blind, you're using Facebook, and you can't be blind, you're on Twitter. I'm like, it's 2016, people. Technology is there. We've come this far. Siri's on your phone. Do you not realize that they've come up with other ways for people who don't have an arm or people who can't see? You're here. You know, it's just funny to me that there is still a little bit of a lack of education outside of the
100%.
disability community on the technology that is there to allow us to live a more normal or average life.
And I think that's what's been allowing people to kind of recognize that the community is growing. You know, we're being connected now. Like you're saying, there are ways. Just because I'm blind doesn't mean I can't use a phone, doesn't mean I can't use these things. And I think that's really helping to advocate for this issue that's going on right now. That's great.
And it's a difficult one, but it's interesting because I remember a number of years ago when we had DragonNet at school. So when we had students that were able to talk into the mic, and all of a sudden the letters were appearing, right? And I'm thinking, oh, wouldn't that be nice? I could use that at home, you know? And all of a sudden you realize the amount of technology and the amount of support that brings in the lives of all of the young people that have access to it. And for people like me, who are still not really with the technology, we're beginning to learn from people like yourselves, you know, that are making us learn, that are saying, look, come on, you know, get with it, get on there and be a part of this, and thus using the technology that you folks use all the time, right?
Sure.
I think it's
Another
quite beautiful.
advantage of technology is it also empowers people to find resources, to find solutions to problems. Oftentimes I'll have a patient come to my clinic and educate me on something that I wasn't clear about.
I mean, in all due respect to both of you, neither of you actually live with the disability.
100%.
So you work with these people every day and you have that form of understanding, but you don't have the form of understanding of living the day-to-day life. And so I think it's great for your patients to be able to go out there, to get online, to use technology to connect with other people that do understand that aspect of their life.
No, that's a wicked point, because I mean, I do work in this field and try to understand what's new and cutting edge, but I don't have that personal relationship. A great example, certain companies are starting to take the front edge of this. I just read an article the other day that Nike just hired a child with cerebral palsy to develop a new shoe, which there's, you know, anybody that has difficulty tying their shoes, whether it's cerebral palsy, it could be any kind of disorder. It's very difficult to do the laces, even if it's Velcro. This kid wrote a letter to Nike. It made it all the way to the top of the food chain, and they hired this kid on to develop and design a new shoe, and it was just launched actually last week, I think. And it's a whole new shoe design where it's just a slide in, one strap that comes around. It supports the ankle, which is great, and it's an exact example of working with somebody with a disability to create a product for that market, which is now going to be available not just in a specialty shoe store, but in every single shoe store that sells Nike products. So it's coming. It's just taking a very long time for some of these larger companies to realize this, and that there is an actual market, and they need to supply and produce products for that.
Yeah, because those are experiences that you and I would never have.
Yeah.
You know, is not even understanding what the need would be, right?
We can
What
only
would it
guess,
look like? What would the shape of the shoe be? Or what would be, you know, where would it be thicker, or where does it need to be thinner, or how do we make sure? So all of those experiences only come for people that live with it.
Yeah, I think it's great that they decided to actually work with the person who needs it versus with the people who work with the people who need it. You know, it's like, why not just go directly to the source?
Cut the middleman out. Yeah.
I'm seeing more and more things like clothing lines popping up that allow children in wheelchairs or who are amputees to wear funky, fashionable clothing as well, and to be comfortable in it the way anybody else gets to be. So I think there is more awareness coming, and we're moving in the right direction. There's more steps to take.
100%, because we're talking about shoes as opposed to therapeutic devices, but it's got to start somewhere, I guess.
Baby steps, right?
It's baby steps,
Steps
you know,
in the right
so.
direction. And I'm sure even similar, like a lot of our viewers are probably wondering, like, wow, Molly looks so great. How does she dress herself? And, you know, it's the same sort of idea of the shoes and just...
I was at a speech today, actually, because I'm a motivational speaker. So I was at a school speaking, and during my Q&A after, one of the boys goes, how do you put your clothes on and make sure they're not backwards? And I went, there's this nifty thing called a tag that's in the back of your clothing.
Yeah.
And everybody just was like, oh, and I was like,
Got it. Yeah.
or I get like, how do you eat? I'm like, with a knife and fork. Like, it's just, it is still funny how just those little things that people just don't know. I think when people have full ability, they really can't imagine not.
100%.
You know, when people can hear, when people can see, when people can walk, they cannot imagine going through life without that ability.
Yep.
And they really can't fathom how it's possible to do certain things that they rely so heavily on that sense for.
That's a lot what I see in my profession, where someone has a full ability and they lose it. That whole area of it, you know, acceptance, and it's
a big shift.
difficult.
Yeah, well, that's what I went through going blind, and it was, I really had to experience almost a death of the person I thought I was, the life I pictured myself living, and come to accept the new life I had and the new person I was going to become, and really create a new life for myself.
Right.
I think that's a critical period too, because a lot of people don't deal well in that early stage, right? And that's the thing, is when
once you get through that hump.
Yeah, that's it. And
So
if you
what
don't,
was it?
that's almost like the make it or break it moment, I
So,
think.
and that's the piece that is, you know, that we question, right?
Yeah.
Is how do we push from that hump that we're talking about, is where they're in that slum, that they're on a downer, and they can't get out of it, and they don't have the push or the pull to get them into a different place to be able to move forward. What does that look like?
You know, I don't think there's one fix-it-all
No.
solution. There is no take this pill, see this person, do this, and you'll be fine. I know in my case, there was so much that went into it. There was finding new activities that I could do and enjoy, finding some kind of a creative outlet for my emotions, seeing a psychologist, learning new skills and getting life independence back. It was finding spirituality. It was finding you know, a way to keep physically fit, a new way to enjoy being physically fit. It was finding nutrition and making sure I was physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy. There was so many things that went into my recovery. And I think that's what's important, is to not just focus on one kind of support or help. It's to really broaden it and get into multiple things that can just make you the healthiest person you can be, mind, body, and spirit.
And that's a really difficult piece, though, isn't it? Is to bring all of those components together. Even as a healthy person, being able to do that's a challenge, right? We think we're going to spend some time, you know, meditating in the morning. I'm retired, and I'm thinking I've got all the time in the world to do all the stuff that I need to do. But I know realistically, I don't know what it is that inspires me to do the one or two things that I do. And for someone to be, you know, pulled out of that, to be able to do all the stuff that you do is just phenomenal. But I think technology, like you're saying, has actually brought you to a place where you've been driven.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. I don't think without technology I would be where I am today or be the person I am today. It's definitely played a big role in my life.
Do you find that in your workplace, is that something that you encourage your patients at all that are going through this sort of down period to begin to use technology or different devices? Are there a lot of devices that you do have that you can share with them? Is that something that we should be doing?
Yeah, there are a ton of different devices.
Yeah.
It just depends on what the patient is going through.
Yeah.
If it's orthopedic injury, we know they're going to recover to a certain level, and what gets them through the rest, I mean, if it's a major fracture and they're fractured, you know, pelvis and femur, and there's, you know, complications there, they're not typically going to recover 100% to where they were, but you want to try and get them to 90, 95% if possible. And it really, I find it really starts with, you know, if you have a good physician, treating physician, say Dr. Alexander, he's making recommendations right off the bat about use this, do this, talk to this person, see a psychologist. I think that's the missing piece that we lose a lot of the times when we're not just talking about orthopedics, but if you're going into spinal cord injury, brain injury, we lose this piece all the time where patients, I think it's because, I won't even go too far into it, but there is a larger piece there where, based on old research and things that have been sort of the norm for so long, patients are told right off the bat, this is where you're going to be, this is not going to happen. We lose a lot of hope, we lose a lot of...
Your key message, please.
Key message is, if we can tackle problems earlier to give more of a positive spin and have support from both physician moving down through the rehab support group along with family, I think it'll be an easier transition and patients can make a better outcome of their situation with the right
Pradeep,
group.
your message, please.
I think the key is having a positive mental attitude. You know, realizing that your life isn't over, that there's more to life than just what ability you've lost. There are other things you can gain, and oftentimes through adversity, you learn more about yourself. I've seen people who go through horrific injuries who come out and always surprise me and shock me. You know, they actually learn new talents, new skills that they never had before. So it's always an opportunity.
Thank you very much for joining us today. And we're going straight to our Artist of the Week today, and we'll be right back with our Voice to Action. So thank you for being with us, and we'll be right back.
At the end of the day, who's tucking you in? Think again. It's you, so who cares about them? What you think about you is most important. So let them say what they want, as long as you know what's up. 'Cause see, there's fact and there's truth. Remember what's true to you. What's true to you, they can't waver. No, no. Their opinion ain't doing you no favors. Keep in mind who's for you, not against you. In other words, don't mind the haters. Just keep your best foot forward and look before you. Chin up, yeah, yeah. Open your mind, I promise. There's nothing worse than when it's closed up. Like some of them, let them say, yeah. Long as you know what's up. There's fact and there's truth. See, fact is what they know, truth is what it is. What's true to you? Yeah, one thing is true. You can do anything you put your mind to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what's true to you.
Welcome back to Insight, Living with Disabilities. Our last segment is on Voice to Action, and we have two phenomenal guests here today, Stacey Ann and Rehana. Welcome. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Stacey Ann, and what you do? And then Rehana, maybe you could follow. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm Stacey Ann Sterling. I live here in Peel region, like most of you viewers, and I teach the LIFE program at March of Dimes Canada. It's a program dedicated to helping young people transition from high school into the adult world. So I get the wonderful job of teaching these beautiful minds life skills that you and I take for granted, but to them it's empowering. To them it's the new beginning of what's next, right? And so I've been fortunate to, because of my personality and my great love for people, all people, as Jamila earlier was saying, that it's not just working with people with disabilities, it's seeing the person for the human that they are. And I bring that to the table every day, and they are flourishing. They are learning that they are necessary. They were born for a purpose and a plan, right? And if we just open our eyes, we watch shows like this that you have today, our viewers will learn that the young people living with disabilities have a lot, tremendous amount to give to our community and to companies and to families and to different organizations here in Peel if we just open our eyes.
Now, the March of Dimes helps a lot of young people that are living with disabilities
That's
in
right.
many different ways.
That's
So
right.
your program is one of the programs.
Just one off.
Right? Yeah.
Because my company, March of Dimes Canada, we try, and our aim actually is to be a one-stop shop, is our motto, be a one-stop shop for people with disabilities. So from birth to the end of life, throughout the life cycle, we try to be there to hear what their needs are and try to meet them. If we're not able to meet those needs, then we do forward or referral to those who can in the community. And a matter of fact, my program, Life program, was started absolutely by parents with young people with disabilities. They were saying, they came to March of Dimes and said, well, what happens to a young person after they leave high school? And that was 5 years ago, not too long ago, right? But what happens to a young person after they leave high school? For you and I, able-bodied, we know we're going on to post-secondary, right? And that was a given. But what happens to young people with disabilities? What are the options out there? Do they know the options? So because of the parents and they're pushing and advocating for their young people, the program started.
And it's interesting because I have a cousin of mine, a nephew of mine now, that lives with a disability, has Down syndrome actually. But the challenge is the worries that the parents go through in terms of what's going to happen to our children or our child after we've gone. You know, so now we're getting up in age and we worry about what's going to happen, who's going to look after them, and what does that mean, how does that translate. So the March of Dimes can at least help support and direct people that need that guidance in order to put things in place well in advance.
Yeah, that's right. What I found, the wonderful thing about the program, it was designed to empower young people leaving high school, but it has become a hub of resource to parents, to guardians, to teachers, to family members about the different questions that you just raised, right? What, when, how? And we've been that hub of support. And the questions that I do not know how to answer, I've been able to network within the Peel region to be able to answer those questions. And outside of just the regular day-to-day programming, I do have an open house twice per year, and I bring in a lot of experts from the community to teach parents about stuff like the Hands-on Trust and the Registered Disabilities Support Plan. And there's so many other benefits that are in the community that as a parent who is just going from day to day, you know, life cares, and it's already a challenge to live with a person and to care for a person with disabilities, the health requirements, the doctor visits, the appointments, and then to also seek and navigate the system for themselves, but to come together in a place where they could find all the answers. It's really been a resource.
Fantastic.
And I'm just lucky to be able to be a part of it and to seek out the answers and to be able to provide those answers.
And we'll put your link up on our Facebook page so that people can go in and at least begin to ask the questions that they don't have answers to. So Rehana, you are, when we look at disabilities, we're not just looking at physical disabilities. And you're at McMaster University, and one of the great things for me is to know that there is that space and a place where our young people can go if they do have problems with a disability that isn't physical or isn't evident. So those invisible disabilities, as it were, or the learning challenges that they may have learning disabilities, but nobody can see what they are, but they can certainly be translating into many different ways in the classroom or at the university. How do you help them?
So my role, I work in the Office of Human Rights and Equity Services, and our role there is to really support students who are going through the accommodation process, but when things have gone wrong. So we work from a human rights perspective where there's an acknowledgement that for students with disabilities to access accommodations, it's their fundamental human right. It's not something that is done because we're just really nice people and we're very generous. It's a right of people with disabilities to access academic accommodations. So when that process breaks down in some way, if the duty to accommodate is not upheld by by professors or the faculty, or if there are any challenges in that process, the students can come to us and we can kind of work through that process and kind of really use that as an opportunity to inform the faculty of their legal obligations, but to also mediate, because oftentimes faculty are unaware of the obligation. But more on a practical level, they also don't know what it means to do things in a more accessible fashion. As a good example, we have a project underway at MAC right now. It's called the Accessible Teaching and Learning Initiative. Well, it's not really a project. We've hired a specialist on contract to help figure out a university-wide strategy on how can we provide resources and tools for instructors and faculties and teaching assistants on campus to promote accessibility within their learning environments, because which is very different from accommodations. So accommodations being something that is individualistic, provided upon request, and requires the students to identify themselves, number one, as someone who's living with a disability.
Now you see, that's a challenge for me too, because I know that one of the students that I was trying to help and support that didn't want to make it public all the time, but had to go and approach every single prof, every single term, and say, you know what, I have a communications exceptionality, could you please make these accommodations? Where is that gap in terms of communication, and why wouldn't the university take on that responsibility to actually communicate with the professors and let them know?
So there are two kind of concepts here that often get conflated. So you have accommodations, which are, again, individualized upon request, requires the individual students to provide documentation and identify as having a disability. That is a legal obligation that any institution has. Accessibility, it kind of is like accommodation is a stepping stone to accessibility in my mind, where we then proactively ask faculty or any organizational institution in Ontario to be proactive in implementing accessibility initiatives within their forum, so that allows for students to not have to identify as someone experiencing disability. To answer your specific question, though, each institution has different processes for accessing the individualized accommodations, and what that looks very different at each organization.
At each university. And again, that's a challenge, and I understand that every institution is going to have its own policies and processes. So as an advocate and a community activist, what am I telling the young people that come to me? And what I'm saying is, you need to go to the university, find out what department, and it should be consistent. I should be able to say, you go to this department, speak with this person, and this is what they will be telling you, and this is what you need to be explaining to them, right? But that's not the case, because every university will have different ways that they deal with it, right?
So you have two
different departments.
So you have two kind of processes in my mind. So you have the organization or the department that provides the disability related accommodations, and then you have the processes, that the anti-discrimination processes and policies, so that if and when, unfortunately, if that process doesn't work out and is not upheld in the way that it should do, you have the anti-discrimination policies, human rights, equity officers that are there to kind of provide the support when things go wrong. I totally agree with you. This is why, for example, in Ontario, we have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which is a proactive piece of legislation that puts organizations, public service organizations and private businesses on notice to say, you need to be proactive in identifying the ways in which we have created systemic barriers that impact people with disabilities being able to access our supports and services, and you need to be proactive in removing those barriers, which then, it doesn't eliminate the need for individualized accommodations, but certainly if we were to really create accessible places and spaces, let's say on campus, it would significantly reduce the number of accommodations that individual people would have to access, because then you're creating a more of an accessible and inclusive community.
I agree, because
if you find as a student attending any of our schools, if you find that things are not accessible for you, then it's not to be angry. It's about educating those who are providing you with the services, right? So take it as, and I try to teach my young people that you are an advocate, you are a voice, And when you're not getting the services or the accessibility that you need, then it's for you to speak up about that and not to just be angry and resigned and, okay, you know, it's not possible, it can't be done.
That's the challenge,
but to
though.
really take that
That's the
forefront
challenge,
because
though,
you're putting
Stacey
inroads
Ann.
for those who are coming behind you, right?
And there were,
I agree.
there were two challenges in that. Number one, I think what we're finding is with students who are transitioning from high school, where they're essentially a child and their parents and their teachers are essentially advocates, are then transitioned into a post-secondary education institution where suddenly they're adults. They're having to proactively, independently seek out accommodation support and then work through that system, however arduous that system may be. And then they have to then know that there is human rights type offices or equity offices available for them to pursue recourse if anything breaks down or there's a problem or the space isn't as accessible as it should be. And I think that the conversation should be more about proactive accessibility, because that puts the onus on all of us.
Right.
Able-bodied and people with disabilities equally, to say we all have a stake in making our communities and our institutions more accessible, and we have a responsibility to do that under the Human Rights Code.
I agree, and I think that's the piece where we have to have people that are disabled, whether it's invisibly or not, at the table.
Yes.
Saying, look, these were the challenges for us. These were the reasons why we dropped out of university, why we didn't end up continuing, because the barriers, because of our challenges, we felt that we just couldn't continue that resilience, that fight that we needed to at that age. Maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years later, they have the strength to do that. But at university, like you're saying, that transition is a huge step.
But every change comes with people who are willing to put themselves out there on the line. And until we're at that place as a society where everything is accessible and everyone is treated with humanity, then we're going to need those who are going to be putting that sweat equity in, right? And if you're a young person like Molly, she is a public speaker and she is bringing that knowledge. I mean, she mentioned earlier that one of the kids asked her, well, how do you get dressed? But it's educating the public, right? And then we will all move towards that goal of being accessible and thinking of serving each person, meeting their needs, and having the society be what we are envisioning it to be.
So your message, please, for our audience today. What would it be?
My message is just that the identification, prevention, and removal of systemic barriers to accessibility is a fundamental human rights issue, and we should not be relying on individuals to self-advocate, but we all have a collective responsibility to be proactively accessible in our communities.
And for you, Stacey Ann?
Each of us are responsible for reviewing our mindset. How do we view people with disabilities? How do we what change can you make personally? What are your prejudices? Be real with yourself. And if we're all accountable and if we're all thinking that way, that we've got prejudices or a wrong viewpoint, then we should really look at ourselves and see how we could change that. Right?
Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for joining us with Insight, and now over to David.
Thanks, Reggie. As businesses continue to become more accessible, it's important that you realize you're doing so much for your community. But as we work towards a fully accessible Ontario by the year 2025, it's not difficult to see that we still have a long ways to go. And whether you're abled or disabled, physically or otherwise, we're all still human and entitled to our rights. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Insight team for watching today. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Towards Social Justice, and follow us on Twitter, @TowardsSJ. On behalf of the hosts here, a special thank you to our guest host, Molly Burke. I'm David Barnwell. Keep having those courageous conversations.